Andy Austin here with the next chapter from the Rainbow Machine, Tales from a Neurolinguist's Journal, which you can buy on Amazon and leave a review. Okay, this is the chapter, Are NLPers Scared of Schizophrenia? This actually started out as a web page on my very first website. Back in those days, back in the 90s, there wasn't a great deal of material online compared to today. It wasn't a case of everyone had a website. I was one of the first NLPers to have a website, first hypnotherapists as well. And so the search engines back then, Google wasn't a thing, pretty much indexed me at the top for everything, which was amazing. And I didn't have that many web pages on there compared to what I have today. But the hit rate I used to get was probably about 100 times, literally 100 times what I get today, because there's much, much greater level of competition. Now, at the time, I was working a lot in mental health and psychiatry. Not exclusively, but I was doing various contracting work. And as a result of where I lived at the time, I had high contact with basically the inner city services, social services, community services. And so I used to get quite a few referrals from them of people in crisis. A lot of those clients who were referred to me were people who were desperate, they had no money, they were heavily medicated or they were off their medication. They were the revolving door clientele of the various institutions, whether that be the local police station, because an awful lot of mental health patients end up actually being picked up by the police because of the lack of psychiatric infrastructure that exists pretty much worldwide, but especially here in the UK. The services are spread so thin, they literally just do crisis management, and as soon as somebody's stable enough, there's police are bringing more people in, just chuck the most stable one, just chuck him out. And then we try and replace that institutionally with community support services and all the rest of it, which is then put through housing agencies. And so we end up with a huge number of people under the auspices of care in the community, living in the inner cities where largely they're not coping, they're socially isolated, and they are frequently exploited by negative elements that live within our communities. And because of the lack of infrastructure, the lack of legal services and protection, and the fact that, frankly, no one actually cares when you have a smelly, delusional, dysfunctional, drug-using individual, is not really a high priority for anybody. They're the people you just step around on the pavement. You might have a spare room in your house, but we'll step around them because we don't know the history, we don't want to get involved. Well, that seems to be the attitude across the board. So the people who are on the more functional end of stuff used to end up being referred to me, not huge numbers, but on a steady stream. So I used to get a good representation of what it's like to work with, on a one-to-one level, people with mental health issues, and it cuts across into all aspects of their life. But I was also doing stuff in institutional residential psychiatry as well as acute services, not so much in acute services, where I was seeing how the services that were organised were attempting to do something, which largely just ended up being drugging. Here was what I saw of the acute unit. So this is the place which has got what's called the airlock. So the entrances, of which there's only, I think, 2 entrances, have double set of doors, and neither set can be open at the same time as the other one. One would open, and then that bzzz, closes, and then once that bell goes, then bzzz, this one opens and you can go through. It's to prevent any escapes. It was insane, the environment. It was a very clinical, very controlled environment, lots of medication and electroshock. They had a small yard. It did have a little patch of grass on it and some potted plants in great big pots, so they couldn't be thrown. They had quite high walls with fence and barbed wire over the top of that fence. So it was really high. I just kind of thought the only thing they're missing is a couple of Germans with machine guns, and it would have completed the scene. Now, in comparison to the austerity and the unpleasantness of the actual environment itself, I was quite impressed with the attitudes and general demeanour of the staff. The staff were actually fantastic. It's just that they were employed within a system that has given them an award, i.e. a degree, a registration, a qualification. And now in order to maintain that, they have to do what the system wants. And every single member of staff that worked there was in complete... completely against the very system they were operating. And this was the most absurd thing. So literally no one I spoke to in that unit wanted to do what they did, but everyone did it because they're just following orders. They're just doing their job. Sounded familiar to me. But they were all very nice people doing awful things. As well, I thought were awful things, but in other parts of the world or other parts of our society, it's deemed to be treatment. Just wasn't anything that I would regard as treatment. So I had quite good exposure to the mental health system whilst I was really practicing and studying and learning the NLP and Ericksonian hypnotherapy. And I was, I think, quite advanced in my understanding and my delivery of the stuff back then. I just hadn't really done any formal trainings as such. But I was running a regular study group at the hospital. I had lots of practice sessions with people, and obviously I was doing one-to-one work as well. So I was kind of working unofficially without having my unofficial piece of paper from an NLP institution. But here was one of the things I started to observe. Now, I have to bear in mind, this was the early days of the internet, and there wasn't so much material online, and as a result, there was a lot more stuff happening in the real world. So practice groups were everywhere, and it was a real buzz back then in the 90s. The NLP, hypnosis, personal development scene was really buzzing, and people were grouping together to get experience, to share resources, to get practice, to learn more stuff. And there were practice groups absolutely everywhere, and I used to go to quite a lot of them, and loved it. I recognized there was huge variation in terms of the quality of the different groups. I was running my own group, which was very small, and I would say that was at the hospital. What I started to detect was the need for people who were ostensibly learning that they could be anything they wanted to be. They could change the world. They would basically drop their existing careers and job plans and set themselves up as an NLP or a hypnotherapist, a coach, whatever it was they were wanting to call themselves. And they could have all these clients would be queuing up for them, and they would make a lot of money and change the world. But I did recognize the kind of clients that they wanted were not the people that I was associating with where this work would be best applied. To me, all of this stuff, this therapeutic application, was better applied to the people who actually had some level of dysfunction. But no one seemed to be interested in that. And when I was talking about my work with schizophrenia, I was not really getting the response that I was expecting from people. Now, I was getting interesting responses elsewhere within the medical professions and the psychiatric services, because I was a hypnotherapist who was interested in using hypnosis and hypnotherapy with schizophrenia. And of course, that's the most absurd thing as far as medicine is concerned, to have an unqualified person doing hypnosis on schizophrenics. Are you insane? But because of the type of people that worked within the system, there were a lot of people who were very interested in what I had to say. And so that's how I got invited into the different psychiatric organizations. Again, we're not talking massive number. I'm not talking international celebrity in the psychiatric field. There was a handful of services around that in which I was closely aligned with on an unofficial basis. But the NLPers, the coaches, the hypnotherapists, the people doing their personal development were more interested in making money from people who didn't really have problems. The worried well, and in this particular chapter I referred to the Jarvis Client, which I have to actually remind myself now what Jarvis stands for, and it's something you may want to look up. Jarvis is YARVIS, and it's young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, and successful. So essentially, the articulate, worried well who are in full-time employment. Now, if you have a look at some of the legendary greats within the personal development community, have a look at how much they charge for their sessions. And then you have to think, okay, so if I've got £10,000 to be able to spend for one appointment with one celebrity personal development trainer, how many problems am I likely to have? What sort of problems am I likely to have when I'm willing to put down 10 grand or more? I've seen people claim much higher fees. Whether people ever pay it is a whole different matter. But essentially what this is doing is creating a divide in the clientele. So people with psychiatric dysfunction who are revolving door patients on medication, in and out police stations, in and out of psychiatric organizations, they're not ever going to be a client of that celebrity trainer. Now, what we then start to see these days, now that every coach, NLP practitioner, hypnotherapist on the planet has a website, all making the greatest claims. They're all the latest, biggest thing. They're all the one who's got the best, the latest, the most update, the most cutting edge, leading edge, all of the things that make them so great. And of course, they'll tell you they're fully insured, fully qualified, internationally recognized, all the kind of crap that coaches will say to make themselves important. Because let's face it, they're not very important. People like myself, therapists, coaches, no one cares. No one cares. It's only within the communities of personal development that actually anyone has any status. As soon as you step outside of that world, which is the rest of the world, which is the majority of it, no one cares. But anyway, what they're all doing, of course, is portraying themselves to be the greatest, the best, the most legendary. They have these ultimate skills, but they also have a fairly high fee, and they don't really want to work with people who don't bring them personally great rewards, either financially or in status. Because here is one of those other things. How do coaches measure the status of their client? You see, if we look at the world of medicine and general surgery, so orthodox medical treatment, every condition has a status level. For example, neurosurgery, cardiac surgery, high status areas to work. Within diseases, breast cancer, women's cancer issues are very high status. Cardiac stuff, very high status. Penis cancer, not so much status. Cervical cancer, much higher status. And so elderly care, chronic long stay care, not so high status. Oops, just dropped my book. So what we start to see is that people will measure how important they are themselves by the clinical discipline by which they do. I once did an agency shift when I was a nurse, and this was up near, and essentially it was a last minute call. We've got someone who's phoned in sick. Can you go in? I went in. Now, the guy I was working with was the nicest bloke on the planet. He was a medical consultant. He was also a qualified surgeon. He ticks all the boxes of high qualification. But what was his clinical specialty? What was I doing for that day? He was fitting dentures. This was the guy who did medical dentures. So when people have had facial trauma, they've had damage or cancer, or something has happened and they've lost part of their face, they've lost part of their mouth. He's the guy that measures up and essentially makes them dentures. That made up probably about 10 to 20% of his work. The rest of the time he's dealing with elderly age-related tooth loss and fixing dentures. He was actually embarrassed by that. Now, he's a consultant surgeon, he's a consultant doctor. But because he's not a heart surgeon, because he's not a brain surgeon, he's the guy that fixes dentures, he knew he had low status, and he was actually embarrassed. And I felt awful for the guy, because I thought, hang on, how does that work? But I get it, we have relative status. Watch what coaches, therapists, and all the rest, look at what they do in terms of how they claim status for themselves. Because one of the things is they jump on bandwagons, they jump on fashion trends. Whatever the latest disorder, and at the moment it's PTSD, but that's become passé because so many people have jumped on that bandwagon, is now CPTSD. They've never read the actual research papers or understand what CPTSD is as a distinct category. It doesn't matter. It just sounds good. Oh, I deal with complex PTSD. Oh, yes, really. Oh, well, I work with veterans, don't you know? Yes, I work with combat veterans. Oh, really? Really? Oh, well, I work with people with phobias and anxiety. So you start to see this trading of status games. And this comes across in their advertising. So, essentially, they might claim high status with the disorder that currently has the social status, because that's obviously what they're going to specialize in. They're going to specialize in whatever the market trend suggests is the one that they can make the money from. But that's not necessarily, of course, the clients that they see. Now, I'm not going to name this person. I'm kind of tempted. But just before Christmas, I was looking on a particular forum, on a particular website. I won't tell you. And I saw a fairly high-profile trainer of alphabet therapy. That's all I'm going to tell you. Who was claiming to have done a very successful session with a serious complex not just PTSD, a serious complex PTSD client, and they had put the video up for them to show their amazing work. It took them 10 minutes to fix this complex problem that this very unwell client had. So I thought, okay, I'm going to watch this video, because I'm always interested when people actually post evidence of their work. I don't wish to be critical of people, because I think more coaches and therapists should be posting evidence of their work. Unfortunately, what we see is a coach doing a fairly standard fast phobia cure on PTSD. Well, that's a different story for a different day. On a lady who had no such thing. In fact, this client that is portrayed to be this seriously unwell PTSD patient had absolutely no behavioural demonstration of any disorder whatsoever, apart from she was clearly a workshop participant who was quite enjoying the day and having quite a nice time. Just because they're using the words of "I've got CPTSD," serious CPTSD, doesn't mean anyone has any such thing. Now, this got me thinking, because I thought, God, this guy might actually think what he's looking at in this perfectly well client is CPTSD. And he might think that this is what trauma looks like. And I saw the same thing with phobias. Because I've had phobics who you merely mention the word of the thing they're phobic of, and they go all grey and they start to go a bit woozy and lose consciousness. I had a lady who was phobic of injections, and I think I put this one in the book actually, and I couldn't even mention injections without her passing out. She'd just literally conk out. Thought, okay, that's interesting. Now, when I've worked with those sort of phobic clients, they've usually seen a number of therapists and coaches ahead of time before they've come to see me. And they've always been told their phobia is too severe. This is really bad. Well, in my world, that's what a phobia is. Most people that say they've got a phobia have nothing of the sort. And I just wonder how many coaches and therapists have never seen a real phobia. They're just seeing people who are using the language as though they have phobias, and actually they have nothing of the sort. They have a mild discomfort, a mild fear, and sure, we can help people with that. No bad thing, but that's not necessarily what a phobia is. The same thing with things like PTSD and CPTSD. So going back to my original thing of the clients that I was working with, at my point of entry into the NLP hypnosis world and personal development, my reality was made up of working with people with serious social, emotional, mental, psychological, and psychiatric malfunctions, where every aspect of their life was not working. These were not the worried well who were able to hold down a steady job, steady relationship, and earn a high income, but still use a diagnosis and then go to a therapist who's charging a high fee. It wasn't those people. These were people who there is no hope of ever getting a payment from. And quite often there's no hope of them even turning up for the appointment. And for me, this shows the divide between what is happening in the mental health system and what the people staffing the mental health system on minimal budgets, on ridiculous constraints, and with an emphasis on basically control via medication. And then the nonsense therapies that get used, oh dear God, save that for another day. And then the people who are going to personal development training groups, and they're part of the training community where they afford themselves really high status, and they think they're working with people with mental health problems. And they're not, a lot of the time. Some of the times, some people will be. In this particular chapter, I give the example of a guy who I made a referral to. So this came about, I was literally just about to leave the country to go off to India for a year, which is back then, I used to do quite a bit. I spent a lot of years, in my 20s, I spent quite a lot of time in India, not so much time in the UK, doing other stuff. Just before, days before, I was asked to consult with this young guy, and I sent him to this particular celebrity trainer who I hoped would be able to work with him. And if I remember correctly, he was reporting obsessive compulsive type disorder, lots of intrusive imagery, and that kind of stuff. The trainer I sent him to immediately referred him to a psychiatric friend because, according to my client and his father, he was told, we think this might be schizophrenia. Of course, fortunately, the psychiatrist went, no, this definitely isn't. Anyway, and then the trainer gave him a stress ball to squeeze every time he felt stressed. And that was it. That was all he did. Now, that was shocking to me that would happen, because to take somebody who has very obvious OCD-type symptoms, but to even offer a diagnosis there is a bad thing to begin with. But then to completely misread that because of the intrusive imagery and go, well, that sounds like psychosis, might be schizophrenia, and suggest that to the young client and his father was unacceptable to me. I was just shocked that could happen. And then there was this bloody stress ball. And we did post it back to the trainer. If you are that trainer and you're watching this video, I forgive you. It was a long time ago. We've all changed. I know, we've all changed. So where am I going with all this? Nowhere really. Apart from, if you're a coach, therapist, trainer, or you're one of these people who are part of the community of personal development, be very careful of the diagnostic categories that you are portraying yourself to be someone who is treating. Because I suspect, based on quite a lot of experience now, because I started all of this in 94, officially started this in 94, I suspect you're not. You just think you are. Now remember, so many clients collect diagnoses, and they collect their diagnoses from various therapists, and they then believe the diagnosis they've got. So you could have this classic thing. So that young guy goes to see a therapist, and the therapist says, oh, this sounds like psychosis, you might have schizophrenia. Now that client goes to a number of other therapists and says, well, I think I might have schizophrenia, because it's been suggested to him. And so you have an awful lot of people who are lacking any official medical diagnosis, which I've got to say, I question the validity of these things in psychiatry. I'm not sure they're valid at all a lot of the time. But people start to collect these things, and then they feed that forward to their therapist, who then feeds it back. And then that therapist may well then start to take claim, oh, I'm working with somebody at the moment with schizophrenia. And they haven't. It's just something that's emerged within. And if you give that client to a diagnosing clinician, they might go, actually, this is not anything here. Be careful of the diagnostic things you claim to be treating. And also, how do you know you're actually treating them? One of the things I saw on the forums, and I know my good friend Nick Kemp is also highly critical of this ethos as well, because we have discussed this over many years, and it's a thing that never goes away, where somebody will post on a forum, I've got a client coming with X problem, what should I do? And then loads and loads of people then give advice as to what they should do, usually their favourite technique. Now, they've never seen the client. They don't even know the therapist they're giving advice to. But most importantly, how do they even know what they're doing works? Have they ever applied it, tested it, and looked at the evidence? Or are they just operating from a belief position of an overly optimistic Pollyanna attitude that simply says, well, because I've done a training course in personal development, I know this will work because I know all about it. And actually, all they've done is attend a 7-day, weekend-long course, or whatever it is, and they know nothing about the actual realities of those conditions. They are giving advice on how to treat. And this seems to be the backbone of how the personal development community operates. The vast majority of people seem to be like this. Now, of course, not you. I'm not talking about you, because you're different, just like everybody else. So as I continue to alienate myself from more and more people within my field, do please use that comment section. Any additional thoughts, comments, objections, complaints, stick them in the comment section and click the like button. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. That's all for this little rant. There's more to come. Stay tuned.